In those days, the Crest was in service to the Shade, protectors of Heartvale. Lord de Soto's agents have been foiled to this point, and our hidden brothers and sisters remain safe for the moment. But a noble of de Soto's stature will not be denied forever. His resources are vast, far beyond what we can muster. But we are fortunate to have a willing ally and patron among the Shade. The captain has sent orders for Lephalia and Iron Gull to smuggle the others out of the city, to perform another task for the Shade. Hopefully it will keep them away from the vengeful blades of de Soto's guards. In the meantime, the captain has been meeting with Steward Captain Auxilia of the Drift. I believe he is trying to use the goodwill we developed with them to ensure the Crest has an escape route out of the city, just in case the politics heat up. It wouldn't be the first time our company was forced to retreat. Lasha was a victory, yes, despite the losses we suffered, but I still remember our contract in Felvan during my 3rd year. The chieftain died, and his replacement was not favorable to mercenaries. He felt as though relying on us demeaned the strength of his own warriors. For 3 weeks we marched through snow and cold, fending off raiding parties before we escaped their borders. Perhaps he learned a different lesson in those 3 weeks. At least here, in Heartvale, the temperature is more tolerable, if the politics are less straightforward. Welcome back for another episode of Errant Adventures. As always, I'm your game master and solo player, Steve Morrison. On this week's episode, Ben and Arid embark on a new mission for the Crest. But first, they have to sneak out of Heartvale. Find out what happens on episode 21, Road to Valewater. It's been a week that Arid and Ben have been sequestered away from the other members of the Crest, as they have been residing in this small apartment in the Grasp. Every now and again, someone delivers them food, and they have passed the time playing cards and talking and reading, in Arid's case, but mostly just waiting. And after a week of waiting, Ben and Arid are both growing anxious to get out of this small apartment and back onto the streets. Anxious to get back to work with the Crest. And so it is with some measure of relief that they hear a knock at the door. And at the moment, they're not sure whether or not they have been found out or if this is someone coming to retrieve them, because this is not their usual time to receive their food delivery. It's the middle of the night, and there is rain pattering the ceiling and the streets outside. Ben and Arid look towards the door, Ben grabbing a hold of the hilt of his sword and making his way over to the door. Arid stands on the far side of this small apartment and begins to focus his talent just in case he needs to call upon it. Ben waits a moment, and there comes another knock, and he thinks it is likely that if guards from the City Watch or killers sent by Lord DeSoto, if they had truly found Ben and Arid in their hiding place, they wouldn't be kindly knocking on the door. So he goes over and unlatches the door and opens it. And standing just outside the door is Sergeant Irongull, hooded and looking a little irritated. He sees Ben staring out at him from inside the apartment, and he says, "Oh, good, you finally answered." Ben says, "Sorry, Sergeant, couldn't be too careful, you know." Irongull chuckles and says, "Well, I've got good news, boys. You can leave the apartment. Follow me." Ben says, then our troubles are over and we can get back to work." Irongull gives him a look and says, "Oh, our troubles are never over, kid. But we've got a new job, and it's going to take us away from Heartvale for a little bit, and that's probably for the best. So follow me." And they are going to head out into the streets of the Grasp and make their way out of Heartvale. Now, we have had a couple weeks where we have not needed to use the scene setup and everything from the Mythic GM Emulator because we've been on what I would call downtime. 2 episodes ago, we had the opportunity to delve into Ben and Arid's backstories a little bit, and then last episode we had the faction turn, but now we are returning to our fate chart and to the Mythic GM Emulator to set up scenes. So for this scene, the scene setup is leave Heartvale with Irongull. And I have returned the chaos factor down to 5 again, because I think enough time has passed that some of the chaos that was going on because of the aftermath of the events at the Defara estate, now it is quieted down a little bit, so we can go back to having our chaos factor at 5. So I'm going to roll a d10, and we're going to see how the scene setup plays out. A 2, which is below the chaos factor, and is a even number, which means this is going to be an interrupt scene. All right, so we're jumping right off the bat with an interrupt scene. Now, an interrupt scene could be a scene that interrupts them leaving, or it could be a scene that basically we go see something else and then come back to them carrying on with their leaving of Heartvale. So to determine this, we are going to roll on the event focus table. And I got a 39, which is move toward a thread. Okay, so our threads currently are find the shade in Valewater, which is the job, the contract that the Crest has taken from the shade. Learn more about the lieutenant. Restore relationship with Merrick. Learn about the connection between Erdira and the Red Fox. So we are going to move towards one of those threads, and I'm going to roll the event meaning. I'm going to roll action and subject and see what that comes up and see if that gives me an inclination of what thread we're going to moving towards. So our action is 41, expose, and our subject is 70, expose extravagance. So I think because of the extravagance, my mind goes to the Red Fox. So I'm actually going to say learn about the connection between Erdira and the Red Fox is going to be the thread that we are moving towards in this. So how are we moving toward that thread in this interrupt scene? How are we exposing extravagance? I think Iron Gull and Ben and Arid are leaving this small apartment building in the grass, and they are just about to emerge onto the street when another hooded figure enters this apartment complex, enters this building, and throws back her hood, and it is Erdira. And she looks up at the three of them and kind of puts a finger to her lips. And Iron Gull gets this cloudy look on his face. But Ben, listening, can hear the tromping of boots outside, and she sort of ushers them back upstairs. Once they're back inside the apartment, Iron Gull, having now also heard those boots and there are voices outside, says, "What's the meaning of this?" And Erdira, looking around at the three of them, says, "I was sent to make sure that you weren't caught. We received intelligence that some city watch had been sent to this neighborhood in the Grasp, looking for a couple of individuals matching Ben and Arid's description. I was sent to make sure that you weren't caught." And they hear, this search going on in this small sort of neighborhood, and doors are being banged on and opened, and there are more voices calling out. There's confusion in the street, and Iron Gull says, "Well, that's all well and good, but if we stay here, eventually they're going to knock on this door." And Erdira says, "Don't worry." And she removes her shade coin, and I think she looks at Ben and winks, and she flicks it up in the air. It spins a couple times and then drops back down into her hand, which she presses up against the door. And a few minutes later, they hear footsteps entering the building and coming up the stairs. Iron Gull's hand goes to his sword. Ben also is ready to draw his weapon. But the boots march past the door and bang on a couple of the other doors in this hallway, rousing the inhabitants. And then, after maybe half a bell, the footsteps retreat back down the stairs and leave the building. Iron Gull looks at Erdira and says, "And what exactly did you just do?" Erdira says, "The Red Fox sent me to make sure that you got out of the city safely. Sometimes that involves a little magic." And she sort of waves the shade coin and says, "My aunt imbued my coin specifically with the ability to cause doors to appear as if they were non-existent, as if they were walls. She seemed to know that just in case we ran into a circumstance just like this." Iron Gull says, "Well, that's useful, but how did you know to find us here?" And Erdira says, "The Red Fox sees many things in the city," and then says nothing more. Ben looks at Iron Gull and says, "Sergeant, I have had the opportunity to see Erdira in action a couple of times, and her coin is quite useful. I'm only grateful that the Shade are on our side." To which Iron Gull grunts and says, "Yeah, our side. All right." And he kind of walks over to the window and looks out and says, "In another hour, we'll make another attempt to get out of here. They should have passed through by then. And so we now know that the Red Fox is Erdira's aunt. So I think that is sufficiently moving towards that thread of learning about the connection between Erdira and the Red Fox. And we can now continue on with leaving Heartvale with Iron Gull. So they wait for an hour as the streets eventually clear of City Watch. And then they are going to make their way back downstairs, and Erdira accompanies them. And I think Ben says, "I'm glad to see you again, Erdira. I'm glad you came along when you did." She smiles and says, "Me too. I won't be coming with you the whole way, but I am going to get you out of the city. I appreciate that." And they emerge out into the rain. Now, how are they going to get out of the city? Because I think that Lord DeSoto has plenty of power as a member of the Council of 12 to set a watch on the gates and to make sure that individuals exiting and entering the city are accounted for. So I don't know that they can just walk out the city gates, but there are probably also hidden ways to get out of the city that smugglers and members of the Shade know about. However, because they're also going to a village on the water a little bit south of town, it's also, I think, reasonable that they might be going and boarding a boat in the harbor and rowing out of the harbor and making their way along the coast. So I think I'm going to start with that of, is there a way out of the city through the harbor? And I think that is likely. So we have a chaos rank of 5. Let's find out. 99, which is an exceptional no. So not only is their way out of the city not at the harbor, I think that is what Lord DeSoto and whoever he has watching out for the members of the Crest is expecting. And so there is a heavy watch on the harbor, and they can't even get close to it. So I think their way out is going to have to be either through the gates and like bribing a guard at the gates, or through some sort of like smuggler's tunnel or something like that. Now, remember, there are also other members of the Crest who were part of the unpleasantness at the estate, and they are also leaving the city. But I think they are with Lephalia, and Iron Gull has collected Ben and Arid. The others are going with Lephalia, making their way out, and then they're going to meet up outside the city. So is their way out a secret hidden tunnel that only the Shade know about? I think, again, it's probably likely. So chaos rank is 5, likely. 59 is a yes. So yes, it is a Shade tunnel. So they make their way through the grasp, and they are heading towards the gate that exits southward out of the city. And Iron Gull says, "Where are you taking us, Shade?" And Erdira says, "There are some tunnels behind a shop along the wall, and the shop is owned by a Shade. It is a front. That tunnel is the way that we sometimes get in and out of the city without having to go past the watchful eyes of the guards at the city gates. The Red Fox has sent another Shade to collect your lieutenant and the others. We will meet them at the shop, and then you will be able to make your way out of the city through that tunnel." So they're not far from that area here in the grasp. So I think what I'm going to do is I am going to actually have Ben roll a face duress, and that is going to help us determine if they're able to move through the city quietly enough to avoid any issues, or if something comes up as they are making their way towards this exit of the city. So Ben has a steady of 2, and we are going to roll 2d6 plus 2. 7 on the dice plus 2 is a 9. So on a 7 and 9, you have flinched, stalled, or hesitated. The MC will pick one or two of the following and tell you what it will look like if you take it. So you can achieve your goal, but it'll come at a price. You can achieve your goal, but only partially. You cannot achieve your goal, but you can do something similar instead. So I think it makes sense that you can achieve your goal, but it'll come at a price. Now, what is that price going to be? Let's go ahead and let's roll action and subject and see if that gives us an idea of what this price might be. So my action is 15, gratify, and 97, gratify leadership. Okay, so they are making their way through the streets, and I think they come across some city watch. Not the city watch who are actively searching for them, but a just random patrol. And I think Ben is able to sort of see that they're coming and realizes that they are not going to be able to get off of the street fast enough. Like, they have basically been seen or at least heard by this oncoming group of watch. And I think Ben is going to turn to Erdira and say, I don't know if this is something you can help with or you even want to help with. So if you don't want your presence here known, make yourself scarce. I'll try to talk our way past. And they approach this group of city watch. And I think there's only maybe 2 or 3 of them. And they call out to the group as they're walking and are like, where are you headed at this time of night? And Ben says, we're headed over to the Shattered Shield. I heard their drinks are cheaper after the 12th bell. You wouldn't care to join us, would you? And the watch look at each other, and the one who spoke says, we're on watch, friend. Right. Ben sort of tries to slur his speech. Apologies. Maybe then I can honor your service to the city. And he pulls out some coins and kind of waves them in the air and says, I can buy you lads a drink when you get off your shift, and sort of waves them. The guards look at him, look at the others, and the 2 who are kind of following the lead of the one who spoke sort of shrug, and the leader takes the coin and pockets it and says, well, I don't see any reason not to accept your generosity, citizen. Be on your way and try not to pass out too drunk in the street. Ben says, thank you, officer. Thank you. And they make their way past. And Ben is going to spend a barter, as he has spent some of his hard-earned coin to essentially bribe the guards to let them pass without any further question. So they make it to this shop with no other interruptions, and they make their way into the shop, and there is a person behind a counter who is polishing some sort of like silverware and has it laid out on this counter. And the person barely gives them a second glance as they pass through. There's a brief moment where Erdira gestures, and there's almost a brief exchange of hand signs, which I think Ben finds interesting because the Crest also uses hand signs to communicate. And they are passed through into the back of this small shop where a tunnel hidden behind a wall is opened up and leads under the city walls and out onto the other side of Heartvale. Once they emerge, they find Lephalia and the other half dozen members of the Crest who are in hiding, and the sergeant and lieutenant take a moment to chat before they head out towards Valewater. And I think that's a good place to end this scene. So I think the chaos factor is going to go up because nothing really bad happened in that scene, but I don't know that it's fair to say that Ben was in control during that scene. So I think the chaos factor is going to go up, and they are going to make their way to Valewater. So our chaos factor is at 6, and I'm going to roll my D10 to see how this scene setup plays out. A 7, which is above the chaos factor, and that is going to mean that the scene setup plays out as expected. So as the rain has passed by and the day has dawned, and it is a clear and lovely late summer day, they have left behind Heartvale. Ben, I think, took a moment to thank Erdira for her help getting them out of the city, and I think she took a moment to ask him to be careful and be cautious, and also wishes them luck on their mission. So now we have Lephalia and Irongall, along with 8 members of the Crest, walking down the road south from Heartvale towards Valewater. And as they walk, Irongall and Lephalia, I think, are going to take an opportunity to brief the Crest soldiers on their mission. So they are on the lookout for a shade who was sent to Valewater to follow a lead about the missing Vidala family and where they might have gone. And that person has not reported in. So let's go ahead and grab a name for this shade, and we know that it is a male from the Red Fox talking to Captain Netheridge at the end of last episode. So I'm just going to go ahead and roll on the male character names and see what I get. A 3 and a 4. Hannibal. So the missing shade is named Hannibal, and he was following a lead in the village of Valewater. So let's roll on action and subject and see if that helps us come up with what this lead is. 21, release, and 39, release news. I think maybe there was an operative of the Royal Dispatch Company who arrived in Valewater and was staying in one of the inns in Valewater, and maybe there were rumors that a Royal Dispatch Company sergeant went out to talk to them and returned to the city and that person was still in Valewater, resting and relaxing before heading off on their next mission. Because I think the Kingsword Criers, the Royal Dispatch Company, their MO is to send out adventurers, traveling bards, minstrels, whatever, to gather information from out there in the world and then to bring it back, and then the artistic manufactories within the city of Heartvale, where the Kingsword are located, are headquartered, then turn that into the news that the criers give out and the pieces of theater that are played throughout the city to represent those events. And so I think this lead that Hannibal was following was, is this Royal Dispatch Company operative still in Valewater, and what information might they have about the Vidala family? Have they heard about them, or, seen where they went, or have any sort of information whatsoever? So they are being briefed on this mission as they make their way down the road towards Valewater. And I think they're making their way on the road. And what is the road like here? So I'm going to ask the fate chart, do they encounter anyone on the road? I think it is very likely. This would be a road that is well-traveled. Valewater, while a smaller village, is basically like a secondary harbor for Heartvale. And I think there are probably a couple of Heartvale naval ships that are around Valewater that protect that part of the coast. And, there is a decent amount of travel that goes to and from this village to the city. So I think it is very likely that they're going to come across someone. Chaos factor of 6. 25 is a yes. Yes, they do come across someone. Who is this someone? Let's go to our character table in Maze Rats, and we have a couple of different options, and I'm going to actually roll on the Wilderness NPC table. 3-1, a hermit. Okay, so they are walking along, and they see this individual in homespun clothes that is maybe walking along the road, maybe not even on the road itself, but off the side of the road. Let's roll on what their goal is. 6 and 6 is wealth. That's interesting. A hermit who is after wealth. So maybe this person is sitting on the side of the road and sees these Crest soldiers making their way along. And this hermit calls out to them and says, "Where are you going, travelers?" And I think Iron Gull and Lephalia just kind of ignore him and keep walking, and so do the rest of the Crest. And he says, "Oh, I see how it is. Don't want to talk to an old hermit sitting on the side of the road. Maybe I know things. Maybe I've got information to trade. It doesn't do you any good to be rude." And I think Ben looks at the rest of the Crest, and he sort of falls back a little bit and approaches the hermit. And he says, "Greetings, and what sort of information do you think you might have that would interest us?" "Right to business, I see. Good, good. Well, tell me, where are you headed?" "Obviously, we are going to Valewater. Otherwise, why would we be on the road?" "No need to be rude. I'm just asking questions. Now tell me, you've got the look of a lad who's seen some action, who's bloodied an individual or two. What are you after, lad?" Ben looks at the continuing sort of walking group of the Crest. I think Iron Gull, who very little escapes his notice, has stopped and is watching as the others of the Crest continue walking. And Ben says, "Why don't you tell me what information you would have to trade, and then I can determine if you have anything that might be worth my while." "Right, you're quite the conversationalist, aren't you?" "Well, I see people going to and fro all the time. Don't mind reporting on what I see. For the right price, of course." I think Ben looks at Iron Gull, and Iron Gull has a very ambiguous face. I think he's observing Ben, see how he handles this situation. And Ben says, "And you've been sitting here for how long?" "The last week. I have a cabin out in the woods, about a half day's walk. But I've been kind of lonely lately, living the hermit life and all, and thought I'd come over this way and keep an eye on some of the travelers, see if I couldn't make a little coin." Ben looks at him, and I think we are going to roll study a person, because there's something about his statement that isn't adding up. When you and someone else are interacting and you try to glean information from them about who they are, what they want, what they're thinking, etc., roll plus sly. So Ben's sly is a 2. So it's going to be 2d6 plus 2. 8 on the dice plus 2 is a 10. So on a 10 plus, ask 3 questions. So the question is, what does this character really want? What is this character's current plan? What does this character wish Ben would do? What is the character leaving out? How could I get this character to do blank? Can I actually trust this character to blank? Okay. What does this character really want? So he has stated that he is a hermit and is here to maybe try to make some coin, watching people coming and going, but there's something that feels a little off about that. Because we know that his goal is to gather wealth, I think there's something about the way that he says he wants to make a little coin that triggers in Ben's head, and he's like, okay, this guy, for some reason, needs money and will do whatever he can to get that money. So I think that is question number 1, which is, what does your character really want? And I think the answer is, he really wants money. Can I actually trust your character to tell the truth about the question that Ben wants to ask? And I think this is a great opportunity for the fate chart. So can we trust this hermit's answers? I'm going to say it's 50-50. Cast rank of 6, 0-3, an exceptional yes. So not only can we trust this hermit's answers, but Ben gets a very good feeling off of this hermit, and that he is trustworthy. And if Ben asks him the question that he wants to ask, he will get an honest answer out of it. So the last question I think I'm going to ask is, what are you leaving out? Because again, there is something missing here. And I think Ben is actually going to ask that question. He says, for someone who is a hermit, it strikes me a little odd that you would bring yourself here and sit by the side of the road and interact with people coming and going. Isn't that a little contrary to the whole ethos of a hermit? And I think before I answer that question, I am going to roll on the misfortunes table in Maze Rats, because I think something happened to this hermit that has caused him to need to gather wealth. A 3 and a 2. Dismissed. So maybe he wasn't always a hermit. maybe he was a merchant or he was something else in life and he was dismissed. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and roll on the civilized NPC table to see what he might have been in the past. 2 and 4. A carpenter. So he was a carpenter before and he was dismissed. Maybe he was an apprentice or he was in some situation where he was dismissed. He is trying to gain wealth in order to maybe regain some station. So he's a hermit, but it's a enforced hermitage rather than something that he desired to be. So I think he sort of looks down as Ben asks this question and says, just because I'm a hermit doesn't mean I'm a hermit by choice. I was forced out here after a little carpentry job went bad. And let's just say I built myself a little cabin with the tools that I brought, and they have been working just fine for me until they broke about a week ago. And, well, unfortunately, I don't really have anything to sell in order to get more tools. So I'm out here trying to figure out something. Honestly, it's not really what I intended for my life. I was hoping that I would be able to get a good job as a carpenter. And, unfortunately, here I am. I think at this point, Ben has heard enough and he says, "What's your name, carpenter?" And he says, "Gillen. Gillen's the name. I'm just trying to make some coin so I can get some new tools and hopefully get my life back on track." Ben looks back at Iron Gull and the sergeant again remains very serious. And Ben says, "All right, Gillen, I think maybe I can help you. I'm looking for a man and I want to know if he passed this way." And he describes Hannibal. And I think we are going to ask the fate chart, did Gillen see Hannibal pass this way? And I think it's actually likely, because it would have been in the last week. And I think Gillen is probably, has a decent eye for faces, and who knows what he thought he was going to be able to accomplish, but maybe he's actually going to work something out here. So I'm going to say it is likely that he saw Hannibal come this way. Chaos rank of 6, 78, with likely is a yes. So he's like, "Oh yeah, I remember seeing that guy. He came through 3-4 days ago." And now comes the important question. Did Gillen see anything happen to Hannibal on the road? Or anything curious that happened maybe around him? Maybe he was being followed. I think it is 50-50. Once again, cast rank of 6. 46 is a yes. So yes, he saw something going on. Was Hannibal being followed? And I'm going to once again say 50-50. 25, another yes. So Hannibal was being followed, and Gillen says, "Right, I saw the guy, came passing on through. There were a couple other blokes, looked sort of like you lads, dour faced, armed to the teeth, and seemed like they were following along. Maybe they were trying to keep their distance, but seemed like this fellow you described was making his way along the road and was walking at a pretty fine pace." Ben says, "Did these men have any symbols or emblems on their clothing?" Did Gillen notice any symbols? I think it is unlikely. 72 is a no. He shrugs and says, "I don't know. I was just noticing them as they were walking past. Seemed like they had an eye out for your friend, and your friend seemed to be moving along pretty quickly." Ben is going to take out a few more coins and pass them over to Gillen. And we're going to go once again and reduce our barter by 1. And Ben is going to say, "Thank you for the information, Gillen. I hope you get some tools And then he kind of like looks back at Iron Gull and says, and if that doesn't work out for you, you know, there are always companies within the city that would be happy to take on new recruits. And Gillen looks at him with maybe a somewhat confused look and like, you mean some sort of guild? And Ben nods and says, yes, a guild of sorts, a company, a mercenary company. And he once again looks at Iron Gull. And I think Iron Gull's far enough away and Ben is talking quietly enough that it's not immediately obvious what he's saying. And then Ben shows him the emblem of the crest. And he says, I think I have the measure of you, Gillen, that you are not a man to pass by an opportunity. Now, I've given you information here, a matter of trust, telling you who I work for. Take it as an opportunity to see another path. The Crest is always hiring, and we could certainly use a skilled tradesman as long as you don't mind getting your hands dirty in other ways. As this dawns on Gillen, he says, right, I never really thought of myself as a mercenary, but I suppose it's possible. I'll have to give it some thought. If I, and he sort of clinks the coin that Ben handed to him and says, you can make this doing your work then. Ben nods. He says, well, I might have to think about it even stronger then. I thank you, friend, for the advice and for the transaction. Ben nods and says, good day, Gillen, and walks away. He returns back to Iron Gull, and the two of them hurry to catch up with the rest of the Crest. And as they're walking, Iron Gull says, did you get anything of use out of that odd fellow? Ben says he saw a shade passing by, and it seemed as though there were some who were following him. Maybe mercenaries, maybe something else. We should keep an eye out for signs of a struggle on the road. Iron Gull nods and passes the word on. So as they are making their way to Valewater, do they see any signs of a struggle on the side of the road? I'm going to call it 50-50. Cast rank of 6. 06 is an exceptional yes. They are walking along for another couple bells, and they are, I would say at this point, about halfway to Valewater. It's about a day's walk to Valewater, and they're about halfway there when, as they are walking along the road, at this point, they are on the lookout for signs of a struggle. And so the Crest has spread out. They are looking for any sort of signs of danger or of anything that has passed through here. And as they are walking, they approach an area where they can see a forest off ahead on the northwestern side of the road. And as they're walking, one of the Crest points and says, over there. They leave the road, and about 20 or 30 paces away from the road, they see a bunch of dried, crusted blood on the ground. It looks as though somebody, or maybe a few somebodies, lost a decent amount of blood here. And as they are looking around, Ben is sort of walking to and fro across what looks like a battlefield in miniature as there are a few broken weapons that seem to have been discarded. There are a couple pieces of like leather armor that have been peeled off and crusted in blood. There's a strange glassy area where the earth itself looks as though it was superheated and turned to glass. And Ben is walking around when his foot hits a piece of metal that he couldn't see because it was almost like half buried in the dirt. And he reaches down and brushes away the dirt. And he sees a small medallion, which he picks up and looks at. There is blood dried on it, and it is unmistakably a shade coin. Thanks for listening to Errant Adventures, and thanks so much to Syrinscape for the lovely ambient sounds and music throughout the episode. If you enjoyed the show, please tell anyone and everyone in your life about it. And if you haven't already, please rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app. It really does help others find me. If you want to interact with me, my handle on Instagram and Twitter is @ErrantSoloPod, or you can email me at errantsolopod@gmail.com. I also post short fiction and campaign-related materials on my website, errantadventurespod.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.